The phone screen was cracking under my grip. I didn't even realize I was squeezing it that hard until I felt a shard of glass bite into my palm, and a thin line of blood ran down my wrist and dripped onto the hospital blanket. The same blanket they'd wrapped around me 2 hours after my C-section. The same blanket that still smelled like antiseptic and sweat and that strange metallic scent of the operating room. My daughter was 17 hours old. 17 hours. She was sleeping in the clear plastic bassinet next to my bed, her tiny fist curled against her cheek, completely unaware that her father had just called to tell me he'd sold our house. Not his house, my house. The 3-bedroom colonial in Ridgewood, New Jersey that I'd bought with my own money 3 years before I ever met him. The house my grandmother helped me with the down payment on. The house where I'd painted the nursery soft yellow 2 months ago, where I'd arranged the crib and the changing table and hung the little mobile with the wooden stars. While you were resting in the maternity ward, I sold your house in the suburbs for $500,000, Brandon said, his voice so casual he might as well have been telling me he'd picked up groceries. Mom handled all the paperwork. You just have to accept it. I could hear her in the background. Karen, my mother-in-law. She was saying something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Smug, satisfied, the voice of a woman who believed she'd just won a game she'd been playing for years. They were sure I had nowhere to go. They were sure I was trapped, drugged up on painkillers, sliced open, alone in a hospital bed with a newborn, and no one to call. But they forgot one thing about me. Actually, they forgot several things, and the most important one was this. In America, paperwork matters more than words, more than schemes, more than a mother-in-law with a notary friend and a son who'd do anything she told him to. Within an hour, people in uniform were at the door of my house, and all their joy, every last drop of it, vanished in seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the part where I was happy, where everything made sense, where I actually believed I'd built the life I deserved. 3 years before that phone call, I was 29 years old, and I was closing on a house by myself. I remember sitting at the title company's office in Hackensack, signing my name over and over, Ashley Wynn, Ashley Wynn, Ashley Wynn, on what felt like 100 pages of documents. My hand was cramping by the end. The closing agent, a woman named Deborah with reading glasses on a beaded chain, smiled at me and said, "Congratulations, honey. It's all yours. All mine." Those 2 words hit different when you grew up the way I did. My parents divorced when I was 11. My mom worked 2 jobs, receptionist during the day, cleaning offices at night. We moved 4 times before I finished high school, always to a slightly worse apartment, always because the rent went up or the landlord sold the building. I shared a bedroom with my younger sister until I left for college on a scholarship. I knew what instability felt like in my bones, in the way my stomach would drop every time my mom opened an envelope from the landlord. So when I landed my job as a data analyst at a pharmaceutical company in Parsippany, and when I started saving with an intensity that my coworkers thought was borderline obsessive, I had one goal, a house, my house, something no one could take from me. My grandmother, my mom's mother, Grandma Lynn, gave me $40,000 for the down payment. She'd saved it over decades, working at a nail salon in Edison. She pressed the cashier's check into my hands at her kitchen table, and she said, "This is yours, Ashley, only yours. You put only your name on that house." I promised her I would, and I kept that promise. The house was a 1940s colonial on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It needed work. The kitchen was straight out of 1987, the basement had a moisture problem, and the upstairs bathroom had wallpaper with little sailboats that I'm pretty sure was older than me. But it had good bones, a big backyard, and a property tax bill that I could handle on my salary. I paid $385,000 for it, put down the $40,000 from Grandma Lynn, plus $22,000 of my own savings, and took out a conventional mortgage for the rest. My name only, Ashley Wynn. No cosigner. I spent the first year fixing it up, New kitchen countertops, fresh paint in every room. I learned how to patch drywall from YouTube videos and how to install a ceiling fan from a very patient guy at Home Depot named Carl, who must have answered 50 of my questions over 3 weekends. That house was my pride, my proof that I'd broken the cycle. And then I met Brandon. It was at a friend's birthday party in Hoboken, one of those rooftop things in July where everyone's sweating through their clothes and pretending the skyline view makes it worth it. He was tall, sandy-haired, blue eyes, easy smile. He worked in logistics for a shipping company, not glamorous, but steady. He asked me about my job, and when I told him I was a data analyst, he didn't do that thing some guys do where they glaze over or try to one-up you. He asked, "What kind of data?" He seemed genuinely interested. We dated for a year. He was attentive, funny, good with my friends. He met my mom and my sister, and they liked him. He brought flowers not just on Valentine's Day, but on random Tuesdays. He remembered that I hated cilantro and that my favorite movie was The Shawshank Redemption, and that I always cried at the ending, even though I'd seen it 30 times. He moved into my house after 10 months. I didn't add him to the deed. Grandma Lynn's voice was in my head. Only your name. But I didn't make a big deal out of it. He never asked, and it never came up. He paid a share of the utilities and groceries, and I handled the mortgage and property taxes myself. It felt fair. It felt normal. We got married at the courthouse 14 months after we met. Small ceremony. My mom cried. His mom, Karen, wore a white dress, which my sister later told me was a passive-aggressive power move, but at the time, I just thought she had questionable taste. Karen. I need to tell you about Karen. She was a retired office manager from Toms River who acted like she'd run a Fortune 500 company. She had opinions about everything. My cooking, my curtains, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the fact that I kept my maiden name professionally. She wasn't overtly hostile. She was worse than that. She was the kind of woman who wrapped her criticism in concern. "Oh, Ashley, sweetie, are you sure you want to keep working so many hours? Brandon says he barely sees you. A marriage needs nurturing, you know." "Ashley, honey, I noticed you don't have any family photos on the mantle, just your diplomas and work awards. Don't you think that's a little cold?" I'm just saying, in my day, when a woman got married, the house became the family's house. Not hers, not his, theirs. That last one. That was the first time I felt a tiny chill. It on Thanksgiving, our first one as a married couple. We were hosting at my house. Karen was sitting at my dining table, eating the turkey I'd brined for 2 days, drinking the wine I'd bought, and casually suggesting that my house, should be reframed as something communal. I laughed it off. Brandon squeezed my hand under the table and said, "Mom, knock it off." And I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That wasn't the end. That was the very beginning. Looking back now, I can see the pattern forming like a slow crack in a foundation, invisible at first, but spreading with every passing month. There were little things. Comments from Karen that lingered in the air a beat too long. Questions from Brandon that felt rehearsed, as if someone had coached him on exactly what to ask and when. About 6 months into our marriage, Brandon started bringing up the idea of refinancing the house. "Interest rates are dropping," he said one Sunday morning over coffee. "We could pull out some equity, do that big renovation you've been talking about. Maybe finish the basement, add a half bath down there." It sounded reasonable. It even sounded exciting. But something about the way he said "we" made me pause. The mortgage was in my name. The deed was in my name. There was no "we" in the financial structure of that house. "I'll look into it," I told him. And I did. I called my mortgage company, ran the numbers, and decided I was fine where I was. A solid fixed rate, manageable payments, building equity steadily. I told Brandon I didn't want to refinance. He took it well, or at least he seemed to. He shrugged and said, "Your call, babe." But that night, I heard him on the phone in the garage. He thought I was asleep. His voice was low, but the garage shared a wall with our bedroom, and sound traveled through the old plaster like it was paper. She said, "No." "I know, Mom. I tried. No, I can't just... Look, give me time, okay? My heart did a strange little stutter. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it could have been about anything. Maybe Karen wanted us to visit more often. Maybe she was pressuring him about holiday plans. It didn't have to be about the house. I almost convinced myself. Almost. Then, 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant, and everything, every priority, every worry, every quiet suspicion got swept aside by the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful reality of a baby on the way. I was going to be a mother. We were going to be parents, and whatever strange undercurrent I'd sensed between Brandon and Karen, it could wait. At least, that's what I told myself, that it could wait. It couldn't. The pregnancy changed my body, my priorities, and, I didn't realize it then, my ability to see what was happening right in front of me. I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced before. First trimester nausea hit me like a freight train. I lost 8 pounds in 6 weeks. I'd come home from work, crawl onto the couch, and fall asleep before 7. Brandon was attentive during those early months, bringing me ginger ale and saltines, rubbing my back when I was hunched over the toilet at 3 a.m. He felt like a partner. He felt like a husband. And Karen? Karen became almost sweet. She called every few days to check on me. She sent a care package with herbal teas and a pregnancy pillow. She even apologized for the Thanksgiving comment about the house. I was out of line, Ashley, she said on the phone, her voice dripping with sincerity. This is your home. You've worked so hard for it. I'm just so happy my grandchild is going to grow up there. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. Around the 5-month mark, when I was showing and the nausea had finally retreated, Brandon brought up the house again. But this time, it wasn't about refinancing. It was about the deed. We were sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies in the yard. It was one of those perfect June evenings where the air smells like cut grass and honeysuckle. He had his hand on my belly, and the baby had just kicked for the first time that day. Hey, Ash, he said, I've been thinking about the house. My stomach tightened, not from the baby. What about it? Well, we're a family now, officially, and I think it would mean a lot to me if my name was on the deed. Not for legal reasons or anything, just symbolically, like we're building this together. He said it so gently, so reasonably. His thumb was tracing circles on my belly, and the baby kicked again, and the fireflies were blinking in the dusk, and everything about the moment was designed, whether by him or by the universe, to make me say yes. Brandon, my grandmother gave me that down payment. She made me promise. I know, and I respect that. I do. He pulled me closer. But your grandmother didn't know me yet. She didn't know we'd be married, having a baby. Things change, Ash. We're not two separate people anymore. We're a unit. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence fill with cricket sounds and the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. Let me think about it, I said. Of course, he kissed my temple. No pressure. But there was pressure. It came the very next weekend when Karen drove up from Tom's River for a surprise visit that didn't feel like a surprise at all. She arrived with a casserole dish and an agenda. We were in the kitchen, me washing vegetables, Karen drying dishes she'd insisted on washing first, Brandon, conveniently absent, claiming he needed to run to the hardware store. Ashley, sweetheart, Karen began, and I knew. I knew from the tone. Brandon told me you two talked about the deed. He told you that? Oh, honey, he tells me everything. He's my son. She folded the dish towel with surgical precision. And I have to say, it broke my heart a little. The fact that he even had to ask. I set down the bell pepper I was holding. Karen, in a real marriage, everything is shared. My late husband, God rest him, and I never had separate anything. Not bank accounts, not property, not secrets. That's what commitment means. I appreciate your perspective, but this is between me and Brandon. Of course it is. I'm just saying, how do you think it makes him feel, living in a house that's legally not his, where he's basically a tenant? He's your husband, Ashley, the father of your child. And he doesn't even have his name on the roof over his head. The way she said it, the roof over his head, as if Brandon were some charity case I'd taken in, as if he hadn't moved into a fully furnished house with a paid-down mortgage and contributed nothing to the equity. The house is in my name because I bought it before we met, I said, keeping my voice even. That's not a commentary on our marriage. It's just a fact. Karen smiled. That particular smile, lips pressed together, head slightly tilted, eyes radiating a warmth that never quite reached her pupils. Of course, sweetie, I didn't mean to overstep. She overstepped. She always overstepped. But that day she also planted something, not in me, but in the air between Brandon and me, a tension that hadn't been there before, a scorekeeping. Brandon came home from the hardware store with nothing. No bag, no receipt, no explanation for what he'd supposedly gone to buy. He asked how my afternoon with his mom was, and I said fine, and we both pretended that was true. I didn't add his name to the deed, but I noticed that he stopped asking, and somehow that silence was worse than the asking. 3 months before my due date, I started nesting in earnest. I painted the nursery that soft yellow I'd picked out, Buttercream Sunrise from Benjamin Moore. I assembled the crib myself because Brandon was working late again. I hung the mobile with the little wooden stars that I'd found at a craft fair in Montclair. I washed and folded tiny onesies and arranged them in the dresser by size. During this time, something else was happening that I didn't notice. Brandon started handling the mail. Not officially. He didn't set up a forwarding address or anything like that. He just started getting to the mailbox first, every day, without fail. If I reached for the front door when the mail truck came, he'd say, "I got it, babe. You sit down, rest your feet." And I'd think, what a thoughtful husband. He was intercepting my mail. I know that now. But at the time, I just thought he was being considerate. I also didn't notice that he'd started photographing documents in my office. The small room off the hallway where I kept my filing cabinet, mortgage documents, tax returns, the deed, my social security card, all of it organized in labeled folders because that's who I am. I'm a data analyst. I organize things. I label things. I keep records. Brandon knew exactly where everything was because I'd shown him once, early in our marriage, in case of emergency. If anything ever happens to me, I'd said, everything you need is in this cabinet. I thought I was being responsible. I was handing him a map to my entire financial life. The thing I missed, the thing that makes me sick when I think about it now, was a conversation I overheard at 7 months pregnant. I'd gotten up to pee at 2 a.m, which at that point was happening roughly every 45 minutes. On my way back from the bathroom, I passed the top of the stairs and heard Brandon's voice from the kitchen below. Said she'd notarize it, no questions asked. "Yeah, Mom, I know, but it has to look right. The title company won't just..." Okay, what about a power of attorney? If I can get her to sign a general power of attorney... I froze on the landing. My hand went to my belly. The baby was doing somersaults. Power of attorney. I knew what that was. I worked in a corporate environment. I understood documents. And I knew that a general power of attorney could give someone the authority to act on your behalf in virtually any legal or financial matter, including selling property. My mouth went dry. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, listening to Brandon murmur into his phone. I couldn't make out Karen's responses, but I could hear the cadence of her voice, rapid, insistent, planning. I went back to bed. I lay there in the dark, one hand on my belly, the other gripping the sheet, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones, anxiety about becoming a mother, reading too much into a conversation I'd only heard fragments of. The next morning, I watched Brandon over breakfast. He made me an omelet. He asked about my doctor's appointment. He kissed me goodbye before work and said, "Love you, Ash. Love you, little one," patting my belly. He seemed so normal, so loving, and I wanted so badly for that to be real that I buried what I'd heard. I shoved it into a mental drawer, slammed it shut, and locked it. But 2 weeks later, the drawer flew open. I came home from work early. My boss had told me to take it easy. I was waddling at that point, and my ankles looked like softballs, and found Karen sitting at my dining room table with papers spread in front of her. Brandon was standing behind her, leaning over her shoulder, pointing at something. They didn't hear me come in. The front door was quiet. I'd had the hinges oiled a month ago. "This section here," Karen was saying, tapping a page with her fingernail. "She needs to sign here and here, and then the notary. Mom, she's not going to just sign something she hasn't read. She reads everything. She's a data analyst, for God's sake." "Then you tell her it's for the baby. Life insurance paperwork, estate planning, something boring that she'll skim." "She doesn't skim. That's the problem." I stepped into the doorway. "What are you two doing?" The way they jumped, both of them, simultaneously, like I'd fired a gun, told me everything I needed to know. Karen swept the papers into a pile with a speed that was almost impressive for a woman in her 60s. Brandon straightened up and manufactured a smile. "Hey, you're home early. Everything okay with the baby?" "Fine. What are those papers?" "Oh, these?" Karen held up the stack, now neatly aligned. "Just some insurance forms." I was helping Brandon sort out his life insurance policy. With the baby coming, you want to make sure. "Can I see them?" The silence lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. But in those seconds, something shifted in the room. The air changed. Karen's manufactured warmth flickered, and underneath it, just for a moment, I saw something cold and calculating. "Of course, sweetheart." She handed me the stack. I flipped through them. They were, in fact, insurance forms. MetLife, Brandon's employer-sponsored life insurance, beneficiary designation pages. Perfectly legitimate. But the bottom 3 pages were stuck together, slightly, as if they'd been hastily shuffled into the stack. I peeled them apart. A blank power of attorney form, general and durable, downloaded from a legal forms website. I could see the watermark, with my name already typed into the principal field. Ashley Wynn. My address, my date of birth. The agent field was filled in too. Brandon Michael Calloway. I looked up at my husband. He was pale. Karen had gone very still. "What is this?" My voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "Ash, that must have gotten mixed in by mistake. I was looking at different forms online and—" "A power of attorney with my name on it, already filled out, just waiting for my signature. It's not what it looks like." "What does it look like, Brandon?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his mother. That look, that instinctive turning to Karen for guidance, for rescue, for the next line in the script, was the thing that cracked something inside me. Not the document, not the lie. The look. Karen stood up. "Ashley, you're being dramatic. It's a standard document. Every married couple should have one. What if something happens during delivery? What if there are complications? Brandon needs to be able to make decisions. Medical decisions require a healthcare proxy, Karen. Not a general power of attorney that would let him sell my property." The room went dead silent. "I think you should leave," I said to Karen. "Excuse me?" "Leave my house, now." Karen looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at the floor. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The hierarchy. Karen at the top, Brandon in the middle, and me, the mark, at the bottom. Karen left. She took her casserole dish with her. Brandon spent the next 2 hours apologizing, explaining, rationalizing. It was his mother's idea. He didn't really understand what the form meant. He would never do anything to hurt me. He loved me. He loved our baby. Couldn't we just move past this? And here's where I made my mistake. The mistake that almost cost me everything. I forgave him. Not completely, not blindly. I told him that if I ever found another document with my name on it that I hadn't authorized, I would file for divorce before the ink dried. I told him that Karen was not welcome in our house until further notice. I told him that trust, once cracked, takes years to rebuild. He agreed to everything. He cried. Real tears, or what looked like real tears. He held me and promised it would never happen again. He said he'd go to couples counseling. He said he'd set boundaries with his mother. And for 6 weeks, he was perfect, attentive, present. He came to every OB appointment. He cooked dinner every night. He didn't mention the house, the deed, or Karen. He was the man I'd married, the man from the rooftop in Hoboken, the man who asked, "What kind of data?" I let my guard down. I was 37 weeks pregnant, exhausted, swollen, anxious about the birth. I didn't have the energy for vigilance. And when Brandon suggested I sign a just-in-case document for hospital pre-registration, the hospital needs authorization for emergency decisions, Ash. It's standard. I was so tired, so ready to be done with pregnancy, so desperate to believe that the man I'd married was who he said he was, that I signed where he pointed. I didn't read every page. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't read every page. He held the clipboard. He flipped to the signature lines. I signed. 3 pages. My hand was cramping from pregnancy swelling, and the pen felt thick and awkward in my fingers, and I just wanted to go to bed. "Thank you, babe," he said, and he kissed my forehead, and I went to sleep. I would not find out what I'd actually signed until I was lying in a hospital bed with 17 stitches across my abdomen and a 17-hour-old daughter in a plastic bassinet beside me. I would not find out until Brandon called me, his voice casual and triumphant, and said the words that shattered my world into pieces so small I wasn't sure they could ever be put back together. But before that call came, there were 36 hours of the purest happiness I have ever known. My daughter was born at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, 6 pounds 11 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire maternity ward. They placed her on my chest and she stopped crying instantly, and I thought, this is it. This is what everything was for. The house, the savings, the years of grinding, it was all to give this tiny person a stable, safe, permanent home. Brandon was there for the birth. He cut the cord. He cried. He looked at me with what I would have sworn was love. And then, 16 hours later, he left the hospital to get the car seat from the house. He said he'd be back in an hour. He kissed my forehead. He told me to rest. He didn't come back for 5 hours. And when he finally called, it wasn't to say he was on his way. "While you were resting in the maternity ward," he said, "I sold your house." That document I'd signed, the one he'd called hospital pre-registration, was a limited power of attorney, carefully worded, granting Brandon the authority to execute real estate transactions on my behalf. Karen's notary friend had stamped it, and in the hours while I was in labor, then in surgery, then in recovery holding my newborn daughter, Brandon and Karen had contacted a buyer they'd already lined up, a developer who'd been eyeing properties in Ridgewood for months, and closed a cash sale for $500,000. My house, my grandmother's gift, my daughter's nursery with the buttercream walls and the wooden Starmobile. Gone. And as Brandon's voice buzzed through the phone speaker, calm and practiced, I heard Karen in the background. Not her words, but her tone. Triumphant. Gloating. The sound of a woman who had finally gotten what she'd been scheming for since that first Thanksgiving dinner. They thought I was trapped. Post-operative, alone, hormonal, broke, with a newborn depending on me and no roof to go home to. But they didn't know about the call I was about to make. They didn't know about the woman whose number was still in my phone. A woman I hadn't spoken to in months, but who answered on the second ring at 10:30 on a Tuesday night and said 4 words that changed everything. "Ashley, what's wrong, honey?" That voice on the phone, it was my mother's. Linda Wynn, the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads when I was a kid. The woman who understood what it meant to lose your home because she'd lost hers 4 times over. She was 61 years old, living in a small apartment in Edison, and she picked up on the second ring at 10:30 on a Tuesday night because that's what mothers do. Ashley, what's wrong, honey? I tried to talk. I opened my mouth, and what came out wasn't words. It was this raw, animal sound, halfway between a sob and a scream, muffled because I was pressing my face into the hospital pillow so I wouldn't wake the baby. My body was shaking so hard the bed rails rattled. The stitches across my abdomen burned like someone had drawn a line of fire across my skin, and I couldn't tell if I was crying from the pain or the betrayal, or both. Ashley, talk to me. Is the baby okay? She's fine, I managed. Mom, he sold the house. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. I could hear her breathing. What did you say? Brandon sold the house, my house, while I was in surgery. Karen, they had me sign something. I thought it was hospital paperwork, and Mom, they sold it. $500,000. It's gone. More silence. Then my mother said something in Vietnamese, a phrase I won't translate, but it involved Brandon's ancestry and a very specific part of his anatomy. And then she said, in English, with a calm that was far more terrifying than any scream, I'm coming. Don't call him back. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything to anyone. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was there in 32. My mother walked into that hospital room in sweatpants and a winter coat thrown over her nightgown, her reading glasses still on top of her head, and she looked at me, really looked at me, and I watched her face cycle through every emotion a human being can feel in about 4 seconds. Shock, fury, grief, and then something harder than all of those, resolution. She pulled a chair up to my bed, took my hand, and said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So I told her, all of it. The refinancing conversations, the overheard phone calls, the power of attorney form I'd found in Karen's stack, the document Brandon had me sign at 37 weeks, the one I thought was hospital pre-registration. The phone call an hour ago where he'd told me, voice smooth as glass, that the house was sold and I just had to accept it. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Your grandmother," she said, "Grandma Lynn. She gave you $40,000 for that house." "I know, Mom. She saved that money for 31 years. 31 years at the nail salon. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes." "Good, because I need you to understand something else." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "In the state of New Jersey, a power of attorney obtained through fraud is void. It doesn't matter that you signed it. It doesn't matter that it was notarized. If you were deceived about what you were signing, if Brandon told you it was hospital paperwork when it was actually a legal document granting him authority over your property, that signature means nothing. It is void." I stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I went through a divorce, Ashley. Because your father tried something similar with the apartment lease in 2004, and a legal aid attorney taught me things I never forgot." She squeezed my hand. "You need a lawyer. Tonight." "Mom, it's almost midnight." "I know a woman, Jennifer Tran. She's a real estate attorney in Fort Lee. She goes to my church. I'm calling her now." "Mom, you can't call a lawyer at midnight." But she was already dialing. And Jennifer Tran, God bless her, answered on the 4th ring. My mother put her on speaker, and I lay there in my hospital bed, my newborn daughter sleeping 6 inches from my elbow, and I listened to an attorney explain to me in precise clinical terms exactly how badly Brandon and Karen had miscalculated. "Ashley, listen to me carefully," Jennifer said. Her voice was sharp, no nonsense, the voice of a woman who had been woken up and was not happy about it, but was going to help anyway. "A few questions. Was your name the only one on the deed?" "Yes." "Was Brandon ever added to the deed at any point?" "No, never." "The document you signed, you believed it was hospital pre-registration paperwork?" "Yes, he told me it was. He held the clipboard. He showed me where to sign." "Did you read it?" My throat closed. "No," I whispered. I was 37 weeks pregnant. I was exhausted. I trusted him. That's not your fault. That's fraud. He materially misrepresented the nature of the document to obtain your signature. In New Jersey, that makes the power of attorney voidable, and any transaction executed under it is potentially void as well. The sale may not be legally valid. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain this time, something else. A tiny, fragile flame of hope. What do I do? First thing tomorrow morning, I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze the proceeds of the sale. If the money hasn't been dispersed yet, and with a cash sale that just closed today, there's a good chance it's still in escrow. We can stop it from going anywhere. Second, I'm contacting the title company that handled the closing. They have a legal obligation to verify the authenticity and validity of any power of attorney used in a transaction. If they didn't do their due diligence, they have exposure too. Third, and this is important, Ashley, I want you to file a police report. A police report? What Brandon did, obtaining your signature on a legal document through deception, then using that document to sell your property without your knowledge or consent, that's not just a civil matter. That's forgery by deception. That's fraud, potentially theft by deception under New Jersey Statute 2C20-4. These are criminal offenses. The room was very quiet. My daughter made a small sound in her sleep, a tiny sigh, barely audible. My mother was gripping the bed rails so hard her knuckles had gone white. I'll come to the hospital first thing in the morning, Jennifer said. Don't talk to Brandon. Don't talk to Karen. If they call, don't answer. If they show up, tell the nurses you don't want visitors. Do you understand? Yes. One more thing. Do you have any record of Brandon telling you that the document was hospital paperwork, a text, an email, anything? I closed my eyes, thought, and then, like a light switching on in a dark room, I remembered. Yes, I said. He texted me. The night before I signed it, he said, let me find it. I picked up my cracked phone, scrolled through my messages with shaking hands, and there it was. October 3rd, 9:47 p.m. Brandon's text. Hey babe, reminder, need to do that hospital pre-registration form tomorrow before your appointment. Just a few signatures, super boring stuff. Love you. I read it aloud. Jennifer Tran made a sound that I can only describe as a predatory exhale, the sound a lawyer makes when she realizes she has the evidence she needs. Screenshot that. Email it to me, right now. Don't delete anything from that phone. I did it with trembling fingers while my mother held my daughter, who had woken up and was starting to fuss. The surreal absurdity of the moment. Emailing evidence to an attorney while my mother breastfeeding wasn't an option, so she rocked the baby. All of us in a fluorescent-lit hospital room at midnight was not lost on me. But there was no time for absurdity. There was only the next step, and the step after that. After Jennifer hung up, my mother settled into the chair beside my bed with my daughter cradled against her chest. She looked at me over the baby's head, and her expression was something I hadn't seen since I was 11 years old, and she'd told me we were moving again. Fierce, protective, unbowed. You're not going to lose that house, she said. Not while I'm breathing. I wanted to believe her. But lying there in that hospital bed, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the IV port still taped to my hand and 17 stitches holding my body together, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. That old feeling, the stomach drop, the floor disappearing beneath you feeling of having your home ripped away. The feeling I'd spent my entire adult life building walls against. Brandon had found the one crack in those walls, and he'd driven a wrecking ball through it. I didn't sleep that night, not a single minute. I lay there watching my daughter breathe, counting each tiny rise and fall of her chest, and I made a list in my head. Not a list of grievances, not a list of fears, a list of actions. Because that's who I am, Ashley Wynn, data analyst, the woman who organizes things and labels things and keeps records. The woman who reads every page, except once. I didn't read every page once, and that once almost destroyed me. But almost is the key word. Almost. Not completely. Not yet. And if Brandon and Karen thought that a woman 17 hours out of surgery, alone in a hospital bed with a newborn, was going to roll over and accept what they'd done, they didn't know me at all. They never had. By 6 a.m., I had a plan. By 7, Jennifer Tran was on her way. By 8, my mother had called my sister, who had called her husband, who was a detective with the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office. By 9 o'clock that Wednesday morning, while Brandon and Karen were probably sitting somewhere counting their $500,000 and congratulating themselves on how clever they'd been, the machinery of the law was already turning. Slowly, quietly, but with the grinding, inexorable force of something that, once started, cannot be stopped. Brandon called me at 9:15. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded cheerful, casual. "Hey babe, just checking in. How's our girl? I'll swing by later with the car seat. Love you." Love you. He actually said love you, while sitting on the proceeds of my stolen home. I saved that voicemail too. Everything was evidence now. Every text, every call, every word. Brandon and Karen had played their game with whispers and forged signatures and a notary friend who didn't ask questions. But I was about to play mine with documents, with timestamps, with the full weight of the legal system behind me. And the first move was already in motion. Jennifer Tran walked into my hospital room at 9:30, briefcase in hand, heels clicking on the linoleum, and she looked at me with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and steel. "I just got off the phone with the title company," she said. "The funds haven't been dispersed yet. They're sitting in escrow. We have a window, a small one, but we have it." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "I need you to sign these. And this time," she said, with just the ghost of a smile, "I promise you'll want to read every word." I read every word, every single one. Jennifer Tran had prepared 3 documents: an emergency motion to freeze the escrow funds, a petition to void the power of attorney on grounds of fraud, and a criminal complaint for theft by deception. I signed all 3 with a hand that was no longer shaking. Something had shifted inside me overnight. The fear had burned itself out, and what was left was something harder, colder, more useful. Purpose. "The escrow company is Patriot Title Services in Hackensack," Jennifer said, tucking the signed papers into her briefcase. "I've already spoken with their compliance officer. When I told her a power of attorney used in yesterday's closing was obtained through fraud, she nearly had a stroke. They're freezing everything until we sort this out. No money moves." "What about the buyer?" "The developer? His name is Richard Stein. He's not going to be happy, but that's not your problem. He bought a property from someone who didn't have the legal authority to sell it. If his attorney did any due diligence at all, they should have caught this. If they didn't, that's on them." My mother, who had been sitting quietly in the corner holding my daughter, spoke up. "What about the police?" "That's the next step," Jennifer looked at me. "Your brother-in-law, your sister's husband, he's a detective with Bergen County?" "Yes, Derek Palumbo." "Good. I want you to call him. Not to investigate, that would be a conflict of interest, but he can walk you through the process of filing a report and make sure it gets to the right people. Fraud cases involving real estate get taken seriously in this county, especially when the victim is a post-operative woman in a hospital bed." I called Derek. He listened. He said 3 words: "I'm on it." Not as a detective, as family. He drove to the Ridgewood police station himself and spoke with the detective sergeant on duty. By noon, a case number had been assigned. Brandon called me 4 more times that morning. I let every call go to voicemail. Each message was progressively less cheerful. The first one, "Hey Ash, why aren't you picking up? Call me back." The second, "Babe, we need to talk about logistics. When are you being discharged?" The third, "Ashley, seriously, pick up the phone." The fourth, and this was the one that made my blood turn to ice, "Look, I know you're upset about the house, but it's done. The money is in escrow and it'll be released tomorrow. We can buy something better, together. This is a good thing, Ash. You'll see." He still thought the money was coming. He still thought they'd won. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was discharged from the hospital. My mother drove me to her apartment in Edison. My sister Michelle was already there. She'd set up a portable crib in the spare bedroom, bought diapers and formula, stocked the fridge. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where 2 people couldn't stand side by side. But it was safe, it was clean, and it was filled with women who loved me. I sat on my mother's couch, my daughter in my arms, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not defeat, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you've lost everything and the fog of pretending finally lifts. Brandon showed up at the hospital at 4 o'clock to find my bed empty. The nurse told him I'd been discharged. He called me 17 times in the next hour. I didn't answer. At 5:30, he texted, "Where are you? Where's my daughter?" I responded with one text, the only communication I would have with him for weeks. It read, "You will be hearing from my attorney. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked his number. The next 72 hours were a blur of legal filings, phone calls, and sleepless nights spent nursing a newborn in my mother's spare room. Jennifer Tran moved with a speed and ferocity that I will be grateful for until the day I die. Here is what happened, in order. Thursday morning, Jennifer filed the emergency motion in Bergen County Superior Court. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Okonkwo, reviewed the motion, the fraudulent power of attorney, Brandon's text message about hospital pre-registration, and my sworn affidavit. She issued a temporary restraining order, freezing the escrow funds within 3 hours. Thursday afternoon, Patriot Title Services confirmed that the $500,000 was frozen. Not a penny had been dispersed. Karen had apparently called their office 4 times that morning, demanding to know when the wire transfer would go through. The compliance officer told her there was a legal hold. Karen screamed at her. The compliance officer documented every word. Friday morning, 2 detectives from the Ridgewood Police Department contacted Brandon at the house, my house, the one he'd supposedly sold, to inform him that a criminal complaint had been filed against him for theft by deception and forgery. They asked him to come to the station for questioning. He declined and said he wanted to speak to a lawyer. Friday afternoon, the detectives contacted Karen at her home in Toms River. Same charges, same request. Karen, according to the detectives' report, said, and I quote, "This is a family matter and the police have no business being involved." The detective informed her that fraud is not a family matter. It is a criminal matter. By Saturday, Brandon had hired an attorney, a guy named Vincent Russo from Paramus. Russo called Jennifer Tran and attempted to negotiate. "My client is willing to void the sale and return the property," he said, in exchange for dropping the criminal complaint and no further legal action. Jennifer's response, which she relayed to me word for word, "Your client sold a property he didn't own using a fraudulently obtained power of attorney while his wife was recovering from surgery. He can void the sale because a judge is going to void it anyway. And the criminal complaint is not mine to drop. It belongs to the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office now. Your client should have thought about consequences before he forged his wife's consent." Russo called back an hour later. His tone had changed. "Mrs. Calloway, Ms. Nguyen, is she open to any kind of resolution?" "Ms. Nguyen wants her house back, the sale voided, and a divorce," Jennifer said. "She also wants a restraining order against Karen Calloway. Those are not negotiations. Those are facts." The following Tuesday, 1 week after my daughter was born, Judge Okonkwo held an emergency hearing. I attended via video from my mother's apartment, my daughter asleep in my lap. Brandon was in the courtroom with Russo. Karen was not present. She'd been advised by her own attorney, whom she'd retained over the weekend, not to attend. Jennifer presented the evidence, the text message from Brandon describing the document as hospital pre-registration, the power of attorney form itself, which listed a notary named Donna Fazio, Karen's friend, who had notarized my signature despite not being present when I signed. The timeline showing the sale was executed while I was in active labor and post-surgical recovery. My medical records confirming the C-section. The voicemails from Brandon acting as though nothing had happened. Judge Okonkwo looked at Brandon across the courtroom. I watched on my laptop screen as she removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and addressed him directly. Mr. Calloway, in 23 years on this bench, I have seen a great many cases of marital fraud, but I have rarely seen one this calculated, this cold-blooded, or this cowardly. You waited until your wife was at her most vulnerable, physically incapacitated, hours out of major surgery, caring for your newborn child, and you exploited that vulnerability to steal her home, the home she bought with her own earnings and her grandmother's life savings. You disgust me. She voided the sale. She voided the power of attorney. She issued a temporary restraining order, barring Brandon from the Ridgewood property. She referred the matter to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation for criminal charges. And she granted me temporary exclusive possession of the house. I moved back in on a Wednesday. My mother drove. Michelle was in the back seat with the baby. When I walked through the front door and smelled the familiar scent of my house, wood polish, and the faint lavender from the sachets I kept in the linen closet, my knees buckled. My mother caught me. I stood in my own foyer and sobbed while my daughter slept in her car seat on the floor of the hallway beneath the coat hooks and the mirror where I used to check my lipstick before work. The nursery was untouched. The buttercream walls, the wooden star mobile, the crib I'd assembled myself. Brandon hadn't even gone in there. Maybe he couldn't face it. Maybe he just didn't care. I changed the locks that afternoon. A locksmith named Eddie came out within 2 hours. He was a friend of Derek's. He changed every lock, installed a deadbolt on the back door, and refused to let me pay. My wife told me what happened, he said. This one's on the house. No pun intended. The criminal case moved forward. Brandon was formally charged with theft by deception and forgery in November. Karen was charged as a co-conspirator. Donna Fazio, the notary, was charged with official misconduct and lost her commission. The prosecutor offered Brandon a plea deal, probation, restitution, and a felony on his record. He took it. He had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen fought the charges. She hired a lawyer, claimed she was just helping her son with paperwork, denied knowledge of the fraud. But the detectives had pulled her phone records, text messages between her and Brandon going back months, planning the sale, identifying the buyer, discussing how to get me to sign. One text from Karen to Brandon, sent 3 weeks before I gave birth, read, "Once the baby comes, she'll be too tired to fight it. That's our window." Our window? She'd planned around my delivery, around my surgery, around the most vulnerable moment of my life. Karen pled guilty in January. She got 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent restraining order barring her from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. The divorce was finalized in March. Brandon got nothing. No share of the house, no alimony, no claim on anything I'd built. New Jersey is an equitable distribution state, but there was nothing equitable about what he'd done, and the judge made that clear. He was ordered to pay child support. He has supervised visitation with our daughter every other Saturday at a monitored facility in Hackensack. He shows up about half the time. I sit here now writing this in the living room of my house in Ridgewood. My daughter is 14 months old. She's pulling herself up on the coffee table and babbling at the cat, a tabby named Mochi that my sister gave me for emotional support and mouse control. The maple trees outside are bare because it's February, but in a few months they'll leaf out and the street will look like a tunnel of green. Grandma Lynn came to visit last month. She sat in the rocking chair in the nursery and held her great-granddaughter, and she looked around at the buttercream walls and the wooden stars and said in Vietnamese, "You kept your promise." I did. My name is the only name on that deed, Ashley Wynn, and it will stay that way until I decide otherwise, on my terms, in my time, with my eyes wide open and every single page read. Because here is what I learned, and what I will teach my daughter when she's old enough to understand. No one who loves you will ever ask you to sign something you haven't read. No one who respects you will wait until you're weakest to take what's yours. And no piece of paper, no matter who notarized it, no matter who filed it, no matter how official it looks, is stronger than a woman who knows her rights and refuses to be silent. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I was trapped. But the thing about a woman who grew up moving from apartment to apartment, who watched her mother work 2 jobs, who saved every dollar and read every document and put only her name on the deed, that woman always has somewhere to go. She goes forward, and she doesn't look back.